Bose is the presenting partner of Beyond the Grid. That's because Bose Quiet Comfort 35.2 goes beyond what you would expect from a pair of headphones. Just flip the switch to experience the industry-leading active noise reduction feature, and all distractions of the world around you fade away, allowing you to focus fully on what matters to you.
Hi, I'm Toto Wolff, and you're listening to Beyond the Grid.
Hello all, TC here with another edition of Beyond the Grid. Now, there have been many great team principals in Formula One history, names like Enzo Ferrari, Colin Chapman, Ron Dennis, Jean Todt, but many would argue that my guest this week is worthy of being in the same company. Such are the things that he's achieved at the helm of Mercedes over the past few years. I'm talking, of course, about Toto Wolff. Toto took charge of the Silver Arrows 5 years ago, and the team's success has been nothing short of spectacular ever since. But success in F1 isn't the only thing that defines the thoughtful Austrian, which is why his story is so compelling. We sat down in his hotel room at the Singapore Grand Prix, which, for the record, was nothing spectacular. A bedroom and a bathroom, nothing flashy, no penthouse suite for this guy. And as you'll probably notice, it wasn't especially soundproof either. There was a lot of ground to cover, but as expected, Toto took it all in his stride. Toto, welcome to Beyond the Grid. Thank you for your time. So much to ask you. Let's kick off by talking about your sidekick, Niki Lauda. How is he?
He's on the mend, as you say, in England. But the surgery replacing Bose lungs is quite a complex operation, and he's getting better every day. The lung functions well, and he's in a positive spirit. I was allowed to see him in intensive care last week, and it was a super happy moment for me to see him absolutely there. When I came in, I said, "You're looking better than I thought," and he replied, Niki style, with a very rude comment. Can I say that actually on a podcast? Or he called me an asshole, which was the best.
Is that how he normally greets you?
No, normally not, but this is the best asshole I've ever heard in my life because it showed me that Niki's back.
It's a really interesting double act, you and Niki, isn't it? And I hope I'm not putting words into your mouth, but was he a hero of yours when you were growing up, when he was doing his thing as a driver? Or
as when I came into Formula One, I looked at it less from the fan side, more from the business side. So Niki Lauda is the most iconic Austrian and one of the greatest personalities in Formula One. So obviously he was a common name, and we have a family relation. Actually, he's the cousin of my ex-wife, so I knew him for a long time. But we never got to work with each other. And when Daimler decided they want to both put us together in this venture, it took a while until we actually synchronized. And but after that year, the relationship grew stronger and stronger. We are very complementary in terms of strengths and weaknesses. And now it's been the 6th year, and we've not only traveled to most of the races together, but we have become friends and completely aligned in our objectives as to where we see the team should develop. And insofar, it's Niki not being here is a little bit like having cut a leg off.
But you've now been team principal for, 5 years? Let's just talk about that time. Is it a long 5 years or a short 5 years?
For me, it is a long 5 years, because what I've been doing before in my job was having great diversity in terms of the project. I was looking at various companies, investing, and the sheer nature of investing mean one day you need to exit and you sell the team, or you sell the company. And here where I have a situation where I launched myself into something which I can actually see myself being involved long term. But I take it as it comes. It's the 6th year now with Mercedes, and before that I've been 3 years with Williams, and I still enjoy what I do. But I like to continue to enjoy the ride and see what I can strengthen the team. And if one day I would feel that I'm either not enjoying it anymore, or I cannot contribute in the way I would expect myself to do, so then I would do something else again.
So the current contract is until 2020, am I right?
You're right.
And I mean, if it was a driver contract, we'd all be asking about now. Are you thinking of renewing? We've had a lot of Lewis Hamilton chat recently. Where are you at with the job and re-signing with Mercedes?
I guess the difference between a driver and myself is that when we invented the structure in 2000, at the end of 2012, one of the key fundamentals was becoming a shareholder, and therefore, by investing in the team, it is not a matter of a contract running out and then embarking on a new venture, but it needs to be a more structured approach. And I feel extremely honored to be a partner with Daimler in their Formula One team. And insofar, we have decided that next year we're going to look at things, how we want to continue beyond 2020, but it's not about a contract running out. There's more fundamental questions to be asked.
As in just about where Formula One is, or Daimler's commitment to Formula One? Is that what you're referring to there?
No, it is more that I always try to meet my own expectations. And as long as I said before, as long as I think that I can meet them and I can contribute to the team's success or the team's journey. It's not always an upward journey. And the Mercedes brand in Formula One, then I would think I would like to continue. But this world is moving so fast, and that's why I don't want to take a decision today for what I will be thinking over the winter.
Would you have taken the job? Was it back in 2012 you took the job, wasn't it? Would you have taken it had you not been offered a share of the team? How fundamental was that?
It was very fundamental for the board of Daimler and myself. They wanted to restructure how the team was being run, and their thinking was that it needed a managing partner that would take some risk, that would have skin in the game, and therefore invest into the team, and also make all decisions on track. A multinational global corporation has a different structure, or needs to have a different structure than a small racing team, and insofar it was a win-win. This is what they expected for the new organizational setup. It is something that was absolutely vital for me of being in the capital of the team.
So what is your management style?
First of all, I don't think that anybody should speak about their own management style, because this is the beginning of losing the plot. And you can't really define it on a single sentence. I think managing an organization is very much how you are as a human. And the single most important personality trait in doing so is being authentic. The team and the people you work with need to be able to understand what you mean.
Can you be friends with people who are your employees?
Everybody in the team has a family and hopefully friends that he is being close to, and we're on a journey together. And whilst being on the journey, we spend a lot of time with each other, and hopefully we have a lot of common objective. And by being in that situation, relationships grow strong. And I would like to say that with some of the people in MGP, but also with some of the people that I've worked previously, be it in Williams or in the DTM team in HWA, I have forged relationships that go beyond a simple working or trivial working relationship.
What about stresses? You always have this very relaxed, apart from when you're slamming the desk. You sometimes slam the desk, we see that on telly, but otherwise you seem to be a very calm outlook. What have been the biggest stresses? What gets to you? What gets your goat?
The racing itself, the thumb thing is not doesn't make me look most intelligent whilst it's happening. But it's me. I'm getting angry when we lose a position, and I'm emotionally involved and passionate. But beyond the qualifying and racing situation, I think it's important to not forget that what we do is sport. It's not politics. And insofar it is important to kind of have the right calibration and not take yourself or what we do too seriously. And there is a few out there in the paddock that have either done that for a long time or haven't seen any other normal business environment that maybe struggle to have the kind of the right calibration.
That's really interesting. Can you put some names on that?
No. And I wouldn't, it's just my opinion and my perception, and I wouldn't do them justice, because obviously everybody's trying to do the best possible job. And my opinion isn't necessarily the ultimate truth.
What about those stressful moments? Talk to us about Nico and Lewis, for example. What was the most stressful moment when Rosberg and Hamilton were going hammer and tongs, and how did you keep it a little nibble? Because you did.
It was very interesting because the team and myself, we grew into this situation. When I joined the team, we were capable of scoring podiums at best, and then in 2013 we started to win races, but it was rather not. We didn't see that coming, so. It was either one or the other. We didn't have a situation that both drivers were actually fighting for a championship, which then became a totally different ball game. And you realize that both of them are complete alpha drivers. Both of them want to attempt to win a world championship. None of them has slotted in for number 2. And this is a little bit like a volcano that has started to shake and then eventually erupt, and every single controversy grew into something bigger, and that became quite a distraction for the team to manage.
What about you personally, though? Because you have to, I assume, be right down the middle with both of them, or did you find yourself sort of wanting to lean towards one more than the other, or does it get complicated like that emotionally?
Because we are humans, it always gets complicated emotionally, because at times you like one more than the other, and that is completely normal. But I had a discussion with Alain Prost back in 2014, which gave me a good learning. And I asked him the question, what went wrong between him and Senna? That two great drivers then saw a relationship breaking down and ending in collision on track. And he said the biggest problem for him was the intransparency of the management. They never knew what the agenda of the senior management in McLaren was. You never knew whether you were in or out, whether you were the flavor of the month or not, whether there were politics against you or not. And what I tried to implement very early in the team was the ultimate transparency. We talk about things. Sometimes it's the inconvenient truth. It's things you don't want to hear. And over time and over the years, we got to know each other better, and we started to trust each other. And the inconvenient truth is something that can be very helpful in order to achieve your objectives. And you just put it all out. And sometimes you agree, but sometimes you walk off the table and you agree to disagree. I love that sentence, by the way. In England, only the English could invent such a sentence.
It doesn't translate into German.
It doesn't translate into any other language, I know. Agree to disagree, and then at least understand each other's standpoint, and that is very important. And this is how we handled the situation with Nico and Lewis. And it wasn't me alone, but in the process there were many others in the team that were really helpful and that managed it in the same way I did.
Do you feel that Lewis has grown since Nico left the team? Is the Lewis Hamilton we're seeing today the same as the one that was losing the World Championship to Nico Rosberg?
What is inspirational with Lewis is that he's a personality that tries to grow on and off track all the time. He analyzes all his shortcomings. And over the 6 years I've been working with him, his personality has become stronger. He knows what he wants. He's obviously become older also. But for me, the most important point in our relationship was a discussion we had after the falling out between him and Nico at the end of the 2016 season. We ended up in my house after the Christmas party of the team and discussed everything, the what I called before the inconvenient truths, and it ended up in a few hours of discussion. Since then, our relationship has become very strong, and we speak to each other many times every week, and we are able to just discuss things, even sometimes they're awkward to discuss.
Do you feel your relationship with him has become, what's the right word? Is it almost more paternal now?
Well, I would hope that he doesn't see me in a paternal role. I'm too young to be a father, and he has one that is has played a huge contribution, or contributed hugely into his career. No, you can't replace the father, of course, but I think in my role,
maybe avuncular would be a better word than sort of more like an uncle. Your experience, you're what are you, 46? You have a lot of worldly experience, not just in Formula One. And do you feel Lewis feeds off that?
He has a pretty cool uncle as well, who I happen to got to know. No, I think I'm different. I'm running the team, and in that function, I'm responsible. But because our relationship has become multidimensional, we are not only talking about the racing and the organization. We talk about his fashion venture and my investments and family, and this is important because the better you know the person with whom you're on the same journey, obviously the stronger the relationship gets.
How key is Lewis to your plans going forward? How nervous were you with coming into the recent negotiations that have seen him re-sign? I mean, had he decided to disappear and go and do something else?
It's like
were you genuinely worried?
Like I said to you before, what we do is sport. I'm never anxious or worried about anything. But Lewis has become a very important pillar in the team over the last 6 years, taking a driver out with his capabilities, who has been very influential in the team over the last 6 years and has grown into the team, would have been a disruption. And I think that in a tough championship like this year, stability is a factor going forward. So I think from his and from my perspective, we always tried hard to come to a solution, and we actually never doubted that we would.
He has a lot else going on. I mean, just coming into this Singapore Grand Prix, where has he been since Monza? He's been to Shanghai to launch a clothing collection. He's been to New York. He's a busy guy. Do you worry that he might just wake up one day and ring you and say, Toto, I don't want to do this anymore. I've got too much else going on?
As I said to you, he's has very many interests, and it was music when we started together, and today fashion has become an important part of his life. And when I see him enjoying designing his own collection and presenting it in Shanghai last week, it makes me super happy. Because if he's in a good place, and if we played a tiny little role in making him achieve that, that means that not only our relationship is stronger, but also he will come to Singapore in a better frame of mind. And we had this discussion already 5 or 6 years ago. People asked me, how can you allow it that he travels from Shanghai to New York and back and then races in Singapore? And my response is still the same. We should not put anybody in a box and be judgmental. Just because it doesn't work for us flying around the world and then driving a race car or managing a team effectively, it doesn't mean that it doesn't work for him. It works for him. He's a 4-time world champion. He's, for me, the strongest driver of the current generation. And insofar, it's not necessary for me to interfere.
Do you think he's driving better this year than ever before?
Well, we say that every time, but I think his driving has been exceptional over the last few years. I don't see any mistakes anymore, and if I see them, they are tiny. But again, there we discussed them, and he wouldn't be leading the World Championship against a very strong Ferrari team and a very strong Sebastian Vettel if he wouldn't be an exceptional racing driver.
Okay, now look, that's enough about Lewis. Great character, great driver that he is. Let's go back to you. Toto, you have achieved some amazing things. I always feel very inadequate talking to you, I have to say, because I look at what you've achieved in your life and I go, God, what have I been doing for the last 43 years? But just talk us through some of the stuff you've achieved. What is your proudest achievement to date? Can be racing, outside of racing.
First of all, I feel flattered when you say that, but I think you have done pretty well as well.
Oh, Toto.
And then you can't talk about achievements of somebody who is in his 40s, because we are on a journey and I really try to be a better me tomorrow and the next year try to grow as a human and as somebody involved in the Mercedes F1 team. But every day I look myself in the mirror and I'm annoyed about the things I did wrong. And insofar I enjoy that journey, and Formula One is what I do now. But there's plenty other people to compare yourself out there that have done much better, or have done much more, have had an impact on the world, have changed the way technology works, have played a fundamental role in for the environment, are involved in politics. The Austrian Chancellor is in his early 30s. I'm not even talking about the great people in Silicon Valley who have provided us with all these new fantastic digital tools. So who am I running a Formula One team that is successful? Yeah, that's great, but it's a tiny little things about in comparison to what other people have achieved.
So what gets you out of bed in the morning then?
The stopwatch. I mean, first of all, my wife gets me out of bed, because if I lay in, and I'm not a morning person, I'm an evening person, she comes in the room with a little one and says, well, it's time to get up. And there's no chance to escape that. But
are you a man then do you press snooze? Is that the first thing you do on your alarm? Press snooze?
No, then I feel too responsible again. And I have this, I can pretend to sleep until a certain time, but then eventually you have to get up in a household that is busy and be in a team where there's many people that sit on their desks already. What was your question now?
Well, just what gets you out of bed in the morning? You've achieved so much. I mean, the statistics, in case people since you took over Mercedes, there have been 86 pole positions and 72 wins. I mean, it's an extraordinary record. A lot of people would argue you've got nothing else to prove running a racing team. You say it's the stopwatch that gets you out of bed still?
Yes, it's the stopwatch to be part of an organization and form a team that can be successful long-term after and beyond the single individual, beyond me, beyond James Allison. Make it a machine that runs because the strengths go so deep into the base of the team, growing the young talent that is there and giving them, empowering them. This is what I enjoy doing. But at the same time, the 70 or so wins, how many was it?
It is 72 wins and counting, I feel.
It's the past. What counts is Singapore in 3 days, and that worries me. And it drives me to win the next races, to do better, to hopefully be in the hunt for another championship. The past will be nice to watch one day when I call it a day, and we'll make a big line below and say this was the record. Then let's look at the number and see whether it was successful or not. But whilst it's running, I don't look at any of these statistics.
Your father passed away when you were 15, am I right?
Yep.
What sort of an impact did that have on you at the time, and does it still have an impact on you today? Is there, at some level, does that help your motivation today?
I think it is a very big motivation, because if a child or a teenager suffers from trauma, that is something that becomes part of you. And channeled in the right way, it can become a great driver. But I'd rather spare any child or teenager to lose a parent, because obviously the psychological impact is enormous, and it was for me.
How did it affect you at the time? Did it, because you were studying at the Lycée Français in Vienna, did you do anything rash? What happened next, if you like?
Again, here it was very traumatic to lose my father, and we were in a very complicated financial situation, because he was ill for almost 10 years and died when he was 41 years old. So that was complicated, and I think it formed me. But again, I try to reference to what others have gone through, and these years were for sure very traumatic and difficult, but I wasn't the only child to whom that happened. Insofar, yeah.
So you're in you said a difficult financial position at home. So you thought you'd go and become a racing driver?
No, that happened. That happened.
I mean, let's face it, the most expensive sport in the world. Talk me through that.
That happened much later. I wasn't following any racing back then, but when we made the driving license, or just before I made the driving license, a friend of ours took the group of mates out for a weekend to Amsterdam. Don't ask what we were doing there.
I was going to, but
yeah. But on the way back, we stopped at the Nürburgring, where a very dear friend of mine, Philipp Peter, was competing in Formula 3, in the German Formula 3 Championship. He was a front runner. He became an Audi Works driver later on. And from the moment I came into the paddock, and then looking at the cars and being on the grid, I caught the bug. And
what was it that was so intoxicating about it? Why? What was it about it that made you want more?
It was the man able or not to control this machine, and it felt like modern gladiators. And this is where I said to myself, well, I want to become a racing driver. I need to see how that can be done.
How old were you at the time?
I was 17.
Okay, so how did you then go about it? I mean, as I say, it's not just buying a pair of football boots and a ball, is it? It's how do you even begin?
I began by making a Christmas and birthday wish list. So it was 2 years in a row. So it was 4 gifts into one, and asking my family whether they would pay me a racing school. And it was so expensive, so I needed to combine them, 2 Christmases and two birthdays. And I went to the Walter Lechner Racing School on the old Red Bull ring, and spent 2-3 days there racing Formula Ford cars, or learning how to drive Formula Ford cars, and that went well. And it became clear this is what I want to do. And then I was going out trying to find sponsorship in order to afford racing.
So that then became the goal. You did the Walter Lechner Racing School, and then, like so many of these young guys coming through, that became the all-consuming passion.
That became the all-consuming passion. I couldn't afford single-seaters at the beginning, so I was doing a thing that was called Seat Ibiza Cup. I bought myself a Seat Ibiza, which also became a road car. And this is how I grew into it. And then I worked for Walter Lechner as an instructor in Spielberg for a few years, and became one of the front runners in the Austrian and German Formula Ford. I went to New Zealand, and it started like a positive little racing career. How good were you? Well, as we are sitting here in a hotel room and I'm involved in the management of a team, obviously, and not out there driving a car, obviously not good enough.
But there are a lot of guys who aren't Formula One drivers. I mean, you raced against some good guys. It was a pretty stellar period for sort of Germany and Austria, wasn't it, at the time? you won races. Just don't be modest. I think people would be genuinely interested to know. And then later on, which we'll come to, you won rallies and GT races. And
I think I got myself to a point that I was able to fight for wins in Formula Ford. And back then, the German Formula Ford Championship was like the, I would say, current Formula 4 or Formula Renault Euro Cup. It was quite a strong championship, but I ran out of money. A sponsor stopped financing after the Senna and Wendlinger incidents in 1994. And this is why I stopped all my racing activities. Also because I saw some of the young guys coming up that clearly had more background and a lot of talent. Alex Wurz is somebody that I mentioned in the past, but there was also Nick Heidfeld. He just started his racing when it was my last year in Formula Fords, and you could immediately see that these kids were different.
What were they doing differently?
They were just faster, straight from the get-go. Even in their rookie seasons, I remember Nick Heidfeld was running a Formula Ford 1600 in a field of 1800. So the best 1600 would qualify midfield at best. And we had a rain and a wet qualifying in Zolder, and this tiny little boy, I don't know how old he was, put his 1600 Formula Ford in the second row. And so you could see that there were some that were more special.
Does it irk you that you never made it as a driver?
No, I don't think so. I think so far I'm 46 years old. My racing career would have been finished since almost 10 years now. I did okay for myself. I don't think I could have achieved anything similar as a racing driver.
But you did go on after the racing career, and you had a very successful business career. What was it? Can you just shed some light on what it was that you did between end of racing career and starting again in Formula One?
I'm not sure your podcast is long enough, but when I stopped racing in 1994 because I couldn't finance it anymore, I couldn't find any sponsorship anymore, I called it a day mid-season. And I'm always pretty radical when I'm taking a decision and I've taken an opinion. This is where I am. And this is it. And I went to work for a bank in Warsaw. So
quite an extreme.
Yeah, from a racing car into a trading floor of a bank in Warsaw was pretty extreme and was tough to swallow, I can tell you.
Did you miss driving? Did you miss the adrenaline of it?
I missed the adrenaline a little bit, but I felt that I was too old as a racing driver already, but then at least I was much younger than everybody else in the bank, and this kept me going. And from then on, I created a little business and never followed racing until many, many years later, 1999. So there was 5 years in between where a friend of mine called me and said, we're doing this fun race, the 6 hours of, I think it was Hungaroring or Brno, in a BMW M3. Are you up for it? I said, I haven't driven a racing car since 5 years. And he said, come on, let's do it together. And this is how I came back as an amateur racing driver and enjoyed myself.
Tell me if I'm wrong, but I've read that you've spent some time on the west coast of America, and you saw AOL and companies like that growing, and you took that know-how back to Austria. Was that where you had your biggest successes in business?
It started actually a little bit earlier because I was running my own trading company, and one of our main customers went into administration, and the only way of saving our debt and our outstanding debt was to buy that company. And this is the first time I got in touch with mergers and acquisitions and actually got interested how that functioned. And pretty much at the same time then I went to the US. It was the East Coast actually, and stayed there for a month. And this was the time, it must have been 1997 or 1998, where these first American internet companies appeared. Netscape, America Online. And I started to get an interest, went back to Austria, and realized that there was a very young little group of entrepreneurs doing exactly the same on a much smaller scale in Austria. And what I did is I invested in the businesses, not really with money because I didn't have that much, but it was more consultancy against shares. And unbelievably, the internet picked up, and the stock exchanges in America, Nasdaq, and in Europe, the Neue Markt, were going through the roofs, and these little structures that were not even companies, but just had a bright idea or on a website, became companies, grew, had proper employees, and we listed them on the stock exchange. And from a one-man show, consultancy against equity became an investment company with proper people, and we had offices all around Europe, and became one of the successful German-speaking venture capital companies.
And that was March 15.
Yes, we called it March 15.
Dare I ask why it's called March 15, or is it obvious?
It's not obvious. We had a PR company that felt we needed a cool sounding name, and this is what they came up. It was the day we founded the company.
On March the 15th?
On March 15th. Yeah.
And so the other company, March 16?
Yeah, I'm not very creative with these things, so I called every follow-up company, I called March 16 or next March or something with March.
Yeah. So that's those were your biggest successes. Then you're racing as an amateur, and then Williams. Yeah, talk us through that. So you became a shareholder in 2000 and I'm looking at you in the eye. 9.
There was a much more important event before. When I was involved in rallying, I had some fun with enjoying myself in the car. Rallying is an exceptional sport. It's more than just driving fast, but it's also experience and intelligence. So I enjoyed myself, and I was a co-shareholder with somebody else, and it was a nice little company to grow. And I was, besides doing that, I was also supporting young racing drivers. I felt that what I didn't have, I wanted to provide to others who had the talent. And I helped a young Canadian driver called Bruno Spengler, who is a DTM driver, Alexandre Premar, who was a front runner in Formula 3, won Macau, raced in GP2 against Lewis and was pretty successful. And by doing so, I got to know the Mercedes Junior program and the managers of the Mercedes Junior program, and we decided to join forces and co-invest with each other into these young drivers. And after a year or two, one of those managers said to me, "You're an investor, have you never thought about buying the Mercedes DTM team?" And I was surprised that it was up for sale because I thought it was owned by Mercedes. And they said, no, it's not owned by Mercedes, it's owned by Mr. Aufrecht, who is the founder from AMG. The A from AMG is Mr. Aufrecht. And it's a company with 150 employees. It's pretty solid, and we're doing we're developing lots of race cars, not only DTM. Why don't you invest in the team? Got to know Mr. Aufrecht, and that was really one of the greatest personalities I've ever met in my life, and he became a mentor of mine, and now a friend of mine. And maybe I can give a little bit back as being the mentor now. So the roles have reversed. He's 79 today, and he allowed me to co-invest in this fantastic company called HWA, and I bought 49%, and we grew it. And listed it on the stock exchange because this was part of my investment strategy. And so I got involved in DTM. And by getting involved in DTM, I took an interest in Formula One and looked at Formula One. And one day, Williams appeared. And I visited them, spent a day there. And the first meeting I saw Frank, he said, "I was told that you can help me repay my mortgage." And I said, "Yeah, I'd like to buy some shares." And he said, "Okay, then let's discuss what they are worth. This is what I need in order to repay my mortgage." And then join Patrick and myself as shareholders of Williams. And here we go.
It was as straightforward as that with Frank.
Frank and Patrick are straight talkers. Frank was always very clear in what his objectives were. And I don't think anybody needs to talk how straight talking Patrick is. sometimes too straight talking, but he knows it. And this was the start of my Formula One adventure as an investor, as a non-executive director. I was listening much more than I was contributing at the beginning in 2009, and got involved in Formula One.
Were you part of the executive board that chose to float on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange at Williams?
Yes.
Would you do that again today?
Straight from the beginning, I found a great partner in Adam Parr, who was the CEO back at the time in Williams, who we had a joint vision how we wanted to develop the team. He as the executive who ran it, and me in a non-executive function as a shareholder. And part of the deal and part of my investment structure was always to list the companies on the stock exchange in order to provide access to more capital in case it was needed, to give it more visibility, to allow investors to buy shares who were before not able to buy shares in a Formula One team, and also a possibility for me to exit one day if I wanted. It's easier to exit a public company than a private company. And the shareholders and Adam Parr were up for it, so off we went, Adam and I, Torpedo Duo, selling the shares in Frankfurt.
But would you do the same now in terms of the way Williams' fortunes are slightly suffering at the minute? Do you feel they are less dynamic because they're a public company?
As a public company, you always have more scrutiny, and if you are micro cap like Williams, this is the kind of stock that is relatively small and has little liquidity. There are some downsides, but I believe it gives a transparent value to Williams today as a public company. It provides them with easier access to finances. If Williams were to issue new capital today, they could easily do it over the stock exchange, and it's much more difficult to do it privately. So insofar, I think it was the right thing to do for the shareholders back then and today.
Now, I asked you earlier on about your proudest achievement, and I want to suggest one race to you. I think it was Austria 2014, where effectively your cars finished first, second, third and fourth. 2 Mercedes, first and second, then 2 Williams, third and fourth. Do you remember that race?
I remember exactly, and it's the only trophy, apart from the Constructor Championship trophy, that I actually have in my office. It's not the nicest trophy, but it is a trophy that has so much value for me personally, because in Spielberg where it's all started for me in the early 90s.
With the Walter Lechner.
With the Walter Lechner racing schools, the endless laps I did there, walking and instructing other people and really not having an idea of where my life would lead me. And then eventually I ended up in 2014 as being a shareholder of both teams, because I didn't sell my shares back then. And we finished on the first 4 positions. And I remember I drove the car back to Vienna that Sunday evening, a trip which I did hundreds of times, and I realized that I was just involved in 2 teams that finished in the top 4 positions in a Formula One World Championship, and that was a moment that was really, really special for me.
It's been an amazing career on and off track. But do you miss the investment side of things now, or do you still buy, sell for the first hour of every day?
Yes, I miss it a lot. I have a great friend of mine who has picked up the baton with our investments, and who advises myself and advises our investment companies what to do. So I'm still involved and watching what happens. But it's something that the diversity of the investments I miss. I still try to be actively involved in some of the fund management. We have a great shareholding in a brokerage company that I enjoy following, and looking at the markets. Together actively we look at what the stock and equity markets are doing, and the bond markets, and I do it every day. The Financial Times is my first read in the morning, and then I dive into racing cars and coming back home in the evening, maybe back into the investment world.
Do you think your business experience has helped you navigate through the sort of potential potholes of the Formula One paddock? Or are they just two different things?
It's two very different things in terms when it comes down to running a team. But Formula One as a business, FYM or Liberty's business, is something which is much closer to what I've done in the past. At the end, it's about growing a business and generating margin, and this is what I've done all my life. So maybe that additional angle of the activities I have done the 20 years before I joined Formula One is something that is helpful, but it's not helpful at all when the lights go on green.
Sure. What about in terms of enjoyment? Which part of your life have you enjoyed the most? The business bit, buying and selling companies, or the Formula One bit?
Now I'm 46 years old, and the part that I enjoy the most is actually my family. I have two wonderful kids that are teenagers, and as far as they let me participate in their life, I really enjoy that. And Susie and I having a little 1.5-year-old who I try to spend a lot of time with him. Before I flew to Singapore, I took him out in the park in Oxford for an hour, and these are things I've never done in the past, and I really love it. And then obviously having a wife like Susie, who is equally ambitious and driven and knowledgeable in our business, is really the fundamental happiness of my life. And then there is a big gap, and then Formula One and investments come. And because I'm running a Formula One team today, it's Formula One as a priority and investment a little bit like a hobby.
Well, let's talk more about wife Susie. She's just become a team principal, actually, in her own right in Formula E. That must lead to some pretty interesting pillow talk in the Wolff household.
Yes, it does. And it's good for me also because she's been in the sport for a long time. On merit, she from go-karting to Formula 3 and then DTM, she's always followed her path. And that is pretty inspirational for me also, because she had so many moments in her life where it looked like that it was the end, but she kept pushing through, and here she is partnering with Gilles de Pastor, who is a great entrepreneur, and running Venturi. And since she has started the journey, we just cross each other at home. She's leaving and I'm coming, but the time we are together we enjoy very much. The pillow talk is about motor racing.
What bit of advice, if there's one bit of advice you can give her as she goes on this next journey as team principal, what advice would you give her?
Actually, she doesn't need advice because she has her own opinion, and she said to me that she needs to go through her own learning phase and make mistakes for her to progress as an entrepreneur in that environment. But obviously, we are almost 10 years with each other now. She's been part of what I've been doing from DTM to Williams and Mercedes, and because motor racing and investments is what we talk 24/7 at home. Some of the things, some of the opinions she has taken on board, I guess.
What do you guys get up to in your free time? Do you have any free time? Do you, Toto Wolff? I mean, I looked at your schedule, and it just doesn't stop.
Yes, we have free time. You
said a moment ago you took Jack to the park for an hour. You know, that's a hands-on dad, but I mean, it's not a long time, is it?
No, but it was a great hour, and to describe it the day I left is a good example. I was working, came home, took the little one to the park for an hour with the football, left, met Susie in Heathrow, and Uli, who runs our DTM team. We had an hour in a coffee shop there discussing DTM and Formula E. Off she went to Monaco to run her Formula E team, and I jumped on the flight onto Singapore. But the time we spend with each other is quality time. And of course, we have the free weekends, and we are trying to use every minute as good as we can. And because the marriage is the fundamental basis of all relationships in the family, we look after our marriage, and we spend time together. We leave for the odd weekends together. We have fantastic grandparents in Susie's parents, Sally and John, who are fantastic. They come for a week and spend time with little Jack, and 2 weeks ago, Susie and I decided spontaneously to go off on a beach for 3 days in Italy and spend just time, her and myself, before the crazy final third of the Formula One season would start.
So just grabbing moments whenever you can. That's how you live your life. And being Austrian and spending some time in Switzerland, are you a good skier? What else are Austrians good at? Skiing?
Well,
quite good at music.
I perceive myself as an okay skier, but if some of my close school friends would listen to the podcast, they would say, well, my skiing is not as great as it could be. But we try to keep a healthy lifestyle and go to the gym. We have a fantastic place in Brackley with funny trainers where we can train. And Susie is into this as well. And we are outdoor people. We go mountain biking and walk around. And this is something that is keeping us healthy for the journey.
Okay, well, Toto, it's been fantastic to speak to you. Thank you very much for your time. I've got one final question, and it's one that I've always wanted to ask you. Have you ever been to Africa? Have you ever met a girl called Rosanna?
Hold the line, please.
80s music gags aside, I found this very enlightening. What a journey Toto's been on, from the trauma of losing his father to being a racing driver, an investor, and now one of the most successful team principals ever. And it was great to hear that Niki Lauda is making progress following his double lung transplant as well. Toto, thanks for your time. That's it for another week, but don't panic, we have another F1 megastar for you next week. Make sure you don't miss it or any other episode of Beyond the Grid by subscribing. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and your favourite podcast app. And please keep in touch using the hashtag F1BeyondTheGrid, or send me a tweet at TomClarksonF1. We love receiving your comments and feedback. Beyond the Grid is produced by F1 in association with Audioboo. Until next time, keep it flat out.